Okay, breakout rooms are closing. You can just, oh yeah, you already clicked it on.
Yep.
Great. Then I can just wander away from the screen. Okay, breakout rooms, we'll be back in about 30 seconds. Bye now, Dave. Is that good? I know, I don't know how to put it.
This is good.
The other one just constantly slides off.
Yeah.
So I figured this will be a little better. Okay, they're having great conversation online this morning. They have not yet clicked back. They're going to take it down right to the wire, the last seconds. Oh yeah, they should be hopping back here there. Welcome back, Zoomers. Can tell you had some wonderful conversation. You took it right down to the last minutes. Welcome back. I'm very excited to introduce this morning our Dharma talk. I'm introducing Christian Solorzano. I got it. Christian is a graphic designer, a photographer, an artist, a writer of a newsletter that he publishes called Beginner's Mind. I know he also teaches at DePaul. He leads the Chicago Graphic Design Club. He's one creative guy, and we are very lucky to have him here at our Sangha. He contributes his talents here in many ways through our beautiful marketing efforts and with social media, flyers. It's so wonderful to have him here to bounce ideas off of. And I'm very honored to have him here this morning to do this morning's Dharma talk entitled In Praise of Doing Nothing. Thank you, Christian.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. So it's been a while since I gave the last talk here, and I've been doing a lot of teaching lately, so I'm a little bit sick of hearing my own voice. So, so I'm going to try to not listen to myself too much. But thanks so much for everyone being here. It feels nice to have like a full house here today. And as Kelly mentioned, the name of my talk is going to be called In Praise of Doing Nothing. And I adapted the talk from a book called In Praise of Slow. And there's an entire movement happening right now that's advocating for doing things slower. And it's a response to fast fashion and the fashion industry, which tends to just mass produce so many different garments. And as we know, things, when they happen fast, it usually leads to very little effort and time for contemplation. So rather than talking about doing things slowly, which I am going to talk a little bit about, I want to highlight and emphasize just how the power of doing nothing. And I think as practitioners of Zen, that's a lot of, we talk a lot about doing nothing, and we talk about meditation, and we talk about slowing down and being mindful. But what I'm going to be proposing is going to take it a little bit further, and is going to be me talking about how we could create a policy for ourselves where on a day-to-day basis, we could afford ourselves the luxury of doing nothing. And I say luxury because I do think that being able to do nothing is a privilege, and it is a luxury. And unfortunately, I don't think many people have the ability to do nothing. I think it comes with a certain socioeconomic status. I think some people are just so pressed for time that to be able to do nothing for most is actually not an option. So I hope that with whatever free time that you guys do have, hopefully there's an ability for you guys to incorporate some of what I'm going to be talking about. So for leading up to this talk, I spent the last 3 days in Elizabeth, Illinois. Does anyone know where that is? Elizabeth, Illinois. So it's about a 3-hour drive from here, about a 30-minute drive from Galena. And I went with my family, and we stayed in this remote cabin where there's no telephone signal or any Wi-Fi. So to get there, you have to sort of memorize the roads and use your intuition, because if you go the wrong route, you have to like drive 10 miles to be able to turn back around. So I had this idea in my head that I was going to be in this remote place called Elizabeth, Illinois, and I was going to sit down and like write the best Dharma talk ever. And and I didn't have the time to actually do that because I was with family and we were doing things and things were a little bit chaotic. So I was able to put together this talk over the past 3 days, but most of it was done last night. So, so I want to talk a little bit about my upbringing, and I've mentioned a little bit about that in the past, but I grew up in a blue-collar family. So from a young age, it was instilled in us that any free time that you had to be productive. And if you were found just laying down, staring at the wall, or just literally just doing nothing, it was bad, and it was called lazy. And laziness is something that I think, my background is Mexican, and in Mexican culture, to be lazy is almost seen as a sin. Like, you shouldn't be lazy, you should work hard, and you should try to maximize the amount of like, you just can't be caught sitting around, because if you do, it's bad. So growing up, I was just this thing was instilled in me that to be lazy was worthy of not getting punished, but you would have people would talk about you behind your back, and people would whisper, and it was just it wasn't very fun. But because I was born, so my mom, she's the youngest of 9, so she was the young child, so she was pretty cool. And she like, luckily for her, she was actually able to foster whatever lazy attitude that I had. So growing up, she would defend me anytime that her older brothers would tell me to like get up and go do something. And anything that I wanted, I was lucky because she would get it for me. So I had a computer and I had a printer, and as someone that does graphic design, being able to create things on the computer and print them out was the absolute best. I had CDs, I had movies, I had everything that any creative kid would possibly want to have. So there was this love with the very thing that I love, creativity. But on the other side, my creativity would sometimes get by my family, it wasn't seen as like a virtue or as something positive. It was almost seen like something negative. And I remember when I told my family that I wanted to go to school for graphic design, they told me that that was a silly career because you couldn't really do much in the arts, and that, it just wasn't something that was going to be profitable. So, and I'm mentioning this stuff because I think, had it not been for this laziness or this me doing nothing, I don't think I would be where I'm at today. So I tend to be a huge advocate for letting people do nothing. And by doing nothing, to me, it means just doing whatever you want, whenever you want, and following that intuition that a lot of us are born with, and that sadly, as we get older, a lot of us tend to lose. So today, I even though Kelly was mentioning all of those things that I do, I still consider myself to be relatively a lazy person. And I take pride in it, and I take pride in doing nothing a lot of the time. Like, I spend a great deal of my days doing absolutely nothing, and every now and then, like, I feel this tinge of guilt, from these like voices from the past telling me that I should get up and like go do something. And I feel like there's just so much value in allowing yourself to do nothing. And I've noticed in my life that from this nothingness, is this space of nothingness, is usually where everything exists. And it's when you give yourself the opportunity to just be with yourself and to just be curious and to literally just walk around the house, picking up a book, picking up some watercolor, or going for a walk. I notice that that's usually when I get my best ideas. And as someone that works in technology, I think there's a lot of pros and benefits to technology. I work in technology. I'm a product designer, so I design apps that let people do things very quickly on their phones. But I tend to be pretty skeptical of technology. So I always approach anything that I'm working on with some healthy dose of skepticism, because I do think that in this society and in this world where everything just moves so fast, sometimes we don't really give ourselves the space to really think about the consequences of the things that we're making. So if you look at social media, for instance, you'll see that it's very polarized, and depending on the people that you're friends with or the things that you click on, that's going to give you a very specific tailored experience. And someone else in a different part of the country might be getting a different agenda. And I'm always very curious about why these type of things happen. And based on what I've read and based on what I've experienced as someone that's working in this field, is that we tend to fill just about every single gap, every single space of nothingness with something. And because this happens, we don't really take the time to really take into consideration the lives that we're affecting, and more so how we're affecting ourselves. So lately, these past couple of months now, I don't know if any of you have been keeping up with artificial intelligence and what that's creating. Today, you're able to type in any prompt into the computer, and it generates whatever prompt you give it. So I could say, a teacup next to Christian, and he's giving a presentation in front of Bigfoot. And within a few seconds, it'll literally create a very realistic representation of whatever I just typed in. And you could go really crazy with these type of things, get really fantastical, and really use your imagination to create a lot of things. And there's been a lot of criticism around just this idea of people creating art using technology, using AI art, which is what it's called. And one of the criticism is that because we're rushing too quickly to create things, we're not really affording ourselves the ability to contemplate and to think through. When you're painting something or when you're writing something, there's thought and there's efforts and there's this like human toll that gets invested into what it is that you're creating, whether it's a newsletter or a book. Anyone that's done that, I know you've written a book. It's not very easy. It's really difficult. And I think there's no way around taking shortcuts and short-circuiting that difficulty that I think is part of the human experience. So anytime I see a new feature or a new technology or anything being presented to us as making us more productive and better and faster, I usually take that as like a huge warning sign that there's something that's wrong. And I'm always, and I don't have an answer to this, but I can't figure out why we have this obsession with speed, and why we're so competitive, and why we're always trying to do things faster than the person next to us. And I don't know why. Does anyone know why we do that? Because there's no goal, like there's no finish line, because once you hit that finish line, then there's something else, then there's something else. And I've noticed that the people that I'm around and the people that are working in this space, there's a lot of anxiousness and there's a lot of anxiety, and there's this sense of uneasiness that I sometimes encounter when I'm in certain meetings or when I'm talking about certain things with people. And I'm working in a creative space, but this creative space is getting polluted with all of these expectations to perform a certain way. So when I was younger, I didn't really care much for school. I had my own education at home that consisted of the music that I would listen to, the people I would read. To me, those were my teachers. But I think it was in 7th grade, and it was a 7th grade science class. We had someone come in and they were talking about health. And they mentioned what they were calling the 5 pillars of wellness. And I know there's a lot of different pillars of wellness and various lists and various interpretations, but it really stood out to me that this teacher brought up that health was not limited to just the physical body. And up until then, I thought that to be healthy, all you had to do was eat and exercise, and that was about it. So this teacher, she talked about emotional health. And it was the first time that I ever heard someone talk about emotional health. I thought emotions were this like feminine trait that only women deal with. And I had emotions, and the people that I was fascinated by, they had emotions too, but it was just never talked about. So the teacher mentioned physical health, which, as we all know, that's just exercising, eating well, taking care of your physical body. Emotional health, just being in tune with your emotions. Spiritual health, which again, spirituality was not something that was talked about. The extent of spirituality in my life was going to church. And to me, church was another place that instilled in people like this sense of guilt. So my relationship with spirituality was not very positive, but for someone in science class to be talking about spiritual health, to me sort of sparked something that I think since then up until today has sort of been this like fire that keeps me just interested in like these bigger questions. And then there was social health, which at the time I always thought of as how popular you were. And to me, a socially healthy person was someone that had a lot of friends and that was popular. And when you were a younger kid, it meant that you dressed good and that you were good looking and that you had a lot of girlfriends. So, but then when the teacher was explaining about like the actual meaning of social health and how it's about the people that you surround yourself with and the quality of your relationships, again, that sort of sparked something else in me that I was like, all right, it's really interesting that there's a thing called social health, and it's not based on how many friends you have or how popular you are. And then last but not least, mental health was the 5th part of this framework of health. And the way mental health was explained was just how you deal and how you process difficult situations. And growing up, there was this invisible rule, because my parents separated when I was very young, so I was raised by a single mother, and a lot of my friends were also raised by single mothers, or if anything, they were just raised with 0 parents, and they were raised by a grandparent or some older person that they literally just found on the street. So we had this invisible rule that we were only going to be friends with people that had no father, but we never talked about it. But then like once you started to recognize and like see who your circle was, one day it clicked in my head that all of my friends, none of us had dads. So around like 7th, 8th grade, that's when I started to take this like 5 pillars of wellness like really, really seriously. And I don't think I was that successful, but I tried and I failed, and I would try to talk about it with my friends. And in college, I remember doing like this big project around wellness and my interpretation of these 5 dimensions. And I'm bringing this up because I think a big part of what threatens our health and what threatens a lot of these attributes and a lot of these things is our addiction to just doing things all the time and our addiction to always wanting to be doing something. And I've noticed that in my life, it isn't until I'm actually giving myself the ability to just sit, whether it's meditation or to just sit and eat my oatmeal or to just go for a walk, that I'm actually able to contemplate and really think about how I'm actually doing in the context of these 5 things. And I have a lot of conversations with a lot of my peers, and I would say I'm pretty lucky to have a group of friends that are pretty interested in wellness and just living a good life. And we have conversations and we talk a lot about this, and it seems like it's always the thing to blame or the thing to point a finger at is just this culture that we live in where we prioritize something over nothing. And it almost seems counterintuitive to be proposing doing nothing or to be proposing doing things slowly, because slowness, I think, is thought of as not being like very skillful or not being very intelligent. But I pulled the definition online, and the way it describes slowness is it's the opposite of fast, and it's calm, careful, receptive, still, intuitive, unhurried, patient, reflective. It's about making real and meaningful connections with people, culture, work, food, and everything. And the paradox is that slow does not always mean slow. And it's actually, by doing things slowly, you're actually able to be, I think, more productive in the things that actually matter in your life. And opposite to slow, we have fast. And fast is busy, it's controlling, it's aggressive, hurried, analytical, stressed, superficial, impatient, active, and it's about quantity over quality. So before I keep going, does anyone have any thoughts on what your relationship is with this idea of nothing or doing things slowly? How does that come up in your life?
There is an emerging slow water movement. It's slow to catch on in the United States because we like to go fast, but it is starting to emerge. But in places like South America, it's much more prominent. And there's actually a good book that talks about the slow water movement.
Slow water movement? Okay. What is the slow water movement? I don't think I'm.
In essence, it's stop trying to control water, which we like to do in the Western world and in Europe, and kind of let water go wherever it wants to go and let it just move at the rate it wants to go. We like to build dams to control it, reverse rivers to control it like we did in Chicago. That's sort of the high level book. The book is titled Water Always Wins. And there's a significant slow water component to it.
Okay, I love that. I'll check that out.
I think the pandemic was an opportunity for so many people to recognize the art of doing nothing.
Yeah.
I know I spoke to so many people over this period of time, and so many were thankful for not having to go out.
Yeah.
It was almost a, externally imposed quietness. I think some of that now is beginning to return to normal speed, but I know for myself and many people I know, that whole idea of really slowing down, almost doing nothing, has revealed a lot more in the stillness.
Yeah, I think for me, the pandemic, although it was not for me, it had its pros, and I think I was lucky that I benefited a lot from that forced isolation. So yeah. Chris, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been sitting back here listening to you thinking that you're basically talking about my life story, the desire to be slower and yet to have a habit of always being busy.
Yeah.
And even, simply just the intention to be slower is not necessarily sufficient.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you got to put some effort into it, and it has to become a new habit. So yeah, I think it's a tough thing. I think everything in our culture encourages us to continue to be fast. So I really appreciate this.
I found myself, and again, this is impossible to do, but I found myself trying to rush slow, and so that gives you a hint of like how bad it is. Why I'm so interested in this.
Any comments online?
Any comments online?
Yeah, we do
Yes.
in the corner there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When you talk about doing nothing, I think we're always doing something. We're sitting here, we're breathing, whatever it is. But I think the concept is more to have the time available and the mindset available to say, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want right now, some fun things or whatever that is. Because I mean, my life's background has been creating an income, creating a living, raising a family. That's a lot of stuff. And so I was always looking forward to, well, what do we have to do next? Do I have to pay this bill, that bill, drive this kid somewhere? And so doing nothing, now that I'm retired, I have much more time to do nothing. And I'm enjoying it a lot. I can read, I can watch Dharma talks, I can sit back and take a nap. So those are a lot of the ways that I do nothing now. So I just wanted to add that in. I don't have to be creating something. I could just take a nap, and that's good for me.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
And a thought over here.
I'm really appreciating this. I'm not good at slow at all. And, but when I'm listening, I think that, but I'm making things, I'm, trying to create things. And it just occurs to me, it kind of resonates that if you create things from that space, they're better. That it's like, I bet people can feel it, the difference of creating from like a fast, frenetic pace. And I have a big decision about something I'm creating, so it's kind of emotional, but I think it would come from a different place. It would feel different.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So in Zen, and Taoism, there's two terms that I think are interchangeable. There's Wu Wei and Mushin. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Roshi. But in both Zen and Taoism, there's a big emphasis on what I've been talking about, on doing nothing. And I found a nice description that talks about these terms, and it states a state of perfect knowledge of the reality of the situation, perfect realization of a perfect economy of energy. Knowledge of the reality of the situation and a realization of the perfect economy of energy. And I think it's so fascinating to hear those words together, an economy of energy and like a perfect realization of the situation. Because I think when we give ourselves the opportunity to actually sit and do nothing, we could actually sit with whatever situation we're in front of and actually be intimate with it. And in the case that maybe you are creating something, or you're just working through an idea, or you're just sitting there, I think just those intimate moments with life and those intimate moments with the people around you, or with animals, or with nature, I think are just essential parts of our humanity. And I feel really bad, because I think a lot of this ability just is today, I feel like it's just getting robbed from us. I was looking at an interview with the CEO of the app TikTok, and he was talking about how his kids are, I believe they're like 7 and 9, and how he doesn't allow them to use the app because he thinks that they're too young. And to me, like, I really respect that guy, because he acknowledges that these mental interceptions that we're all caught up in are actually doing a lot of harm. And I I don't know, like I always ask myself if the kids that are growing up today have it harder than when I grew up, or harder than like previous generations, because I think at least when I was a kid, I had to go outside to play because there's nothing to do in the house. And today it's just very easy to get fixated on so many different things. And I'm reading a book right now called Slow Focus. It's by an author named Johan Hari, and it was published this year or late last year. And he talks about how our inability to read things and to skim things nowadays, like so quickly, actually hinders our ability to process things and to actually comprehend things and to form our own opinions. And what that leads to is that the opinions that we sometimes have are actually not our own opinions, but they're opinions that we think are our own, or they're actually the opinions of others, and they're opinions that we adopted through this mode of just skimming through information and just glancing over and like just picking up on the headlines. So I think just doing so much and being obsessed with productivity and doing something every single day, not only is it robbing us of our ability to be with ourselves, but it's also polarizing us, and it's also creating more division amongst ourselves. It's also hindering our ability to actually understand how the world works. So it's funny because I host a podcast, and people always ask me what podcast I listen to, and I always say I don't listen to podcasts. And when I do, I could only listen to one podcast, like one a week or like twice a month, because I've noticed that if I'm listening to something, whether it's a book or a talk or whatever, I need to let it sit with me for at least a week or two, and to like really think about what it is that was presented to me. And I think today, just this huge library, this huge collection of information, I find just super, super stressful. It's like trying to choose a movie on Netflix, and you just spend like an hour trying to decide, and then an hour passes, you're like, well, I've already been watching TV for an hour, just scrolling through things. And I don't know, it's scary. It's like, to me, it's super, super alarming. But again, this is the technology that we're celebrating, and these are the innovations that a lot of companies are trying to compete with and trying to get better at. So I guess that's, and I want to end things off by a quote by an activist. Her name's Audre Lorde. It's not Audre Lorde, even though it's spelled that way. It's Audre Lorde. She was born in 1934 and she died in 1970. And she was she confronted a lot of sexism, classism, and homophobia. And she had this quote where she said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and it is an act of political warfare." And I think what I'm talking about, doing nothing, I think it is a form of activism, and it's a form of, it's us fighting against the system, or it's us rebelling. I think it's a radical, rebellious act to just go home and like turn the TV off and just like do nothing. I think it's I don't know, I think it's super punk rock, and I just think it's, and just to go back to my my childhood of I didn't go too much into this, but when I was younger, I had a strong attitude towards authority, and I was a troublemaker. So to me, I think that troublemaking continues in my life today when I just sit down to do nothing. So I think we could all be, I don't know, better troublemakers, I guess, by protesting against everything that's happening. So that concludes my talk. I had an idea for this talk, but I didn't do it. But I was like, how clever would it be if my talk was just me sitting here doing nothing? But I think it's too avant-garde. Maybe some other time. Yeah, any thoughts, Earl?
Yeah, we have some over here. Let me pass the microphone.
Yeah, I remember we had a speaker here once who he wrote this book about Buddha in jail, and he talked to us, and before he talked, or he was sitting in the room, and slowly he just closed his eyes and sat there, and the room is chattering, people are talking, you know, blah 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 blah. And gradually, you know, it just disappeared. I mean, it finally slowed down and we could be ready to hear what he was going to say. But he just sat there with his eyes closed in a meditative state and just was there. So it calmed everyone down.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, that reminds me of sometimes you meet certain people that have like this feel to them where they're just so spacious and they're not saying anything. It's just their presence that allows you to slow down. June, I think you're one of those people that I think always encourages people to slow down.
Yeah, sure. Another comment over here. Those online, you can hop off.
Christian, first off, that was just a fabulous talk. Thank you. It was really great. And you bring that same calm too. You have a presence that's really calming. What you said at the very end about it being sort of an activist approach, it reminded me there is a book out there called Rest as Revolution by a new author. Have you heard? Okay. And it's really, when I read about it, I listened to the author in a podcast. And I was like really struck. I mean, she's really taking this seriously about this being a revolutionary act because capitalism seduces us into being, to be part of the grind. So, just something you might be interested in.
Yeah, I wrote it down. Yeah, the whole idea of even the language that we use. Like I hear grind a lot. There's another word that I hear which is hustle, and anytime people talk about those words to me, they talk about them as if they're good things, as if it's like a positive thing. And sometimes people will be like, Christian, well, you're grinding all the time. I'm like, I'm not. It looks like I am, but I don't think I am. So.
Yeah. First, I could tell you I'm the queen of doing nothing, which my family will attest to.
The quote is to do nothing and rest afterwards.
Yeah, I have that embroidered. It hangs in my room. How wonderful it is to do nothing and then rest afterwards. Okay, I do, however. Okay, so I'm retired now, and I retired right before the pandemic. So between the pandemic and retirement, and so when people ask what I'm doing, I say, you know, my life is really quiet now. It's just very quiet, and I read all the time. Okay, I am not completely comfortable with that at all. Audre Lorde is one of my idols. You know, she did a lot. She called herself the Black lesbian woman warrior. No, she didn't have lesbian. She didn't have women in there, but she was a Black lesbian warrior, and there was another one in there too. Anyway, she was an extraordinary woman, and she was sick with cancer for years, and I don't question whatsoever what she said and how she believed it, and I think it, you know, she did much more than that though too, is all I'm saying. And I really feel like I'm at loose ends, and I mean, I've worked and I've been very active politically, and now that's changed, and I think there's a balance. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a balance, and I think it's dangerous for me to just, there's so much that needs to be done. There's so much horrific in the world, you know. There's so many ways to make a difference, to somehow address suffering. And to me, it's really important to do that, you know. And it's so I'm trying to find a balance, and certainly the balance is more, there's more on the side of doing nothing, of meditating, of reading, of walking, of self-care, tons of self-care. As I get older, I need more self-care because there's a lot of going on that needs to be addressed in order to keep me as capable as I can be. But it's also very important to me to figure out how to be engaged in a way that is making a difference with people. And I haven't figured it out. I haven't figured it out. And I am still trying to.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I'm not suggesting that we literally do nothing. I think in order to do something, you need to be able to do nothing. And I think in that nothingness space, I think that's where the ideas come forward, and when the things that are important to you, you know, start knocking on your door, and I almost view that nothingness as where things are activated, and that tends to inspire me whenever I'm, like, you know, out and about. But yeah, it's that's something that I'm still trying to figure out, is how can I be of service. And it's sometimes I feel like I'm doing it, and sometimes I don't, and I think it's probably just gonna be like that forever. I don't know.
I'm reminded of a quote by Billie Jean King, who once said, "Never confuse action with motion." And I think culturally we always do that. And I find, speaking of culture, I'm a big fan of pop culture, and I find myself finding these moments where you find the Zen in these moments. And the one that I'm thinking of is from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if anybody remembers, there was the scene with the apes and the obelisk. And at first their fight-flight mechanism kicks in. And it's just, again, the obelisk is just there. But their fight-flight mechanism kicked in, and they're all screeching and like jumping up and trying to hit it and jumping back. But you then generally start to see them all calming down and staring at it. And the last scene before they flip towards the future is really this first moment of awe, of finding the numinous, of saying, this is something I've never encountered and something I need to take in. And I think the point there, and then the scene right after that goes to a spaceship, which means that's the moment that led us to scientific progress. And I think sometimes we forget to find the numinous in the quiet. And then
Over here, and then if there's anyone online, we'll turn to you for a moment.
Okay, I'm really bad at not being productive. I will confess that. But what I noticed, and especially when my kids were little and raised, by Friday night, everybody was just like packed. So we would purposely have a night of nothingness, and that's what we called it, where we would do nothing. So, and it's really embarrassing that we had to plan it, but that's what we did. And everybody started to accept that. That was just the night. Nothing was going to happen. We just hung out together. So sometimes you can plan it.
Online, you can go ahead and just jump off mute. Go ahead, Roshi.
Oh, Baizan, that was a wonderful talk. We are on steroids in our culture, so we're so busy, and I can really relate to this. But I also picked up on what Harry said, you know, and I think you're also saying this: doing nothing you're still doing something when you're doing nothing.
Correct.
So, like, if you take the Chinese term that you mentioned, Wu Wei, it means literally inexertion or inaction, or effortless action. And so that's kind of Zen practice. There's a koan we have that I mentioned at our last board meeting where there's a monk in the monastery that's sweeping the grounds or doing something, and somebody comes by and says, "Boy, you're really busy, aren't you?" And he says, "Well, yeah, but you should know there's somebody who's not busy." So not being busy in the middle of our life, doing what we do, I think is what we're getting at here. And so not to make doing nothing into some absolute any more than making being fully active into an absolute. There is a balance and between being a pusher and being completely out of your mind and being a slacker and absolutely doing nothing or being lazy. And I think we need to sometimes be a slacker, especially when we're on vacation. And sometimes we need to be a pusher when we go to work. We actually have to do work. And so, but I think the question is, how do we do this with some equanimity and peace of mind that doesn't stir up all that extroverted steroid stuff that is so much of our culture? I love this idea that doing nothing is a revolutionary act. That's really an interesting idea. So thank you again, Baizan. It's a wonderful talk.
Yeah, for me, it always just comes back to listening to my body and feeling how I feel and knowing when to stop, because I've noticed that when I'm caught up and super, super busy, sometimes I'll forget to eat, or I'll forget to, or I won't get good sleep at night. So that's usually like that signal of, all right, Christian, you need to.
Remember when the pandemic started? I remember looking out the window and there were no cars on the street. Nobody was driving their cars for a couple of months, and it actually felt really good. You know, it's like, wow, the earth is getting restored, the waters are getting cleaner, we're not polluting the air. It actually felt pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, we have another online. Go ahead. You can hop off mute.
Oh, thank you. And thanks, Chris, for giving this talk. And so there should be a balance between like doing nothing and I guess hustling, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it just goes back to listening to your body. I think it's perfectly fine to be like, there's days where I work 12 hours straight and I feel great, but then I could only do that for so long before I start doing a bad job. People around me start to notice. So I think, yeah, just listening to your body, and that's why I mentioned those 5 pillars that teacher shared with me in 7th grade. Just make sure that you're not sacrificing anything in exchange for something else, and sometimes you might have to, and I think that's perfectly fine. But I think just don't let it go on for too long.
Got it. And with technology, like you mentioned, Chris, TikTok, I don't know, this is kind of off topic, I guess. I don't know if I should even bring it up, but he's not letting his kids use the app, or he minimizes the amount he lets his kid use the app. But then, over here, I hear so much negative things about TikTok that, just decreases concentration spans. Kids are just taking it to a whole nother level, posting kind of crazy stuff and just using it for negative ways. And I don't know, I just keep hearing negative things about TikTok, that it collects data on us illegally, and then I don't know what they do with it, but they sell it, or I don't know, I just hear like negative things about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about the data stuff or any of that, but I do think that at least in our Western culture, we do prioritize just like that quick entertainment, and I think I have TikTok on my phone, and sometimes I'll go on it just to see like a one clip, and then before you know it, I'm like 30 minutes have podcast, and I'm like down a different rabbit hole, and it's fun and it's entertaining and it's addicting. But I think the difference between here is that like the CEO of TikTok was saying how there's certain parental controls that TikTok has within the app, but some
Chris, can I interrupt for a second? Your microphone's pointing to the floor and it's very difficult to hear you now.
Oh, sorry.
Point it towards your face, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, but I was saying like I think in the West we definitely have like we just like that quick hit of dopamine whenever we're engaging with those apps. And I think what the CEO was mentioning is that there are some parental controls within a lot of these social media apps, but I think sadly not too many people make use of them. But yeah, I don't know too much about like the whole data TikTok thing. Oh, Roshi?
You know, we're starting a 7-day retreat tonight, and one of the things we always do in a Zen session is we do Samu work practice. We wouldn't think of not doing that. And the idea is that you just do what's in front of you. And we actually, I think it's a way of learning how to enjoy work. When you're not attached to the outcome or stuck on that, then you actually get a lot done when you're just doing what's in front of you. And you're kind of one with what you're doing, so to speak, and you're not so distracted. And there is a lot of, I think, neuroscience data that would support the idea that we're happier when we're actually focused on doing whatever is in front of us. We're focused on it and not multitasking and distracted. We're actually a lot calmer and happier. So again, I think this notion of effortless action is really kind of at the heart of what Zen practice is about, is how to be in the world and be active and fulfill our, you know, as Ruth was saying, we take Bodhisattva vows to save all sentient beings, and that's not a small thing. So there is a lot that needs to be done. The question is, how do we do it without making ourselves crazy?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? Am I on? Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
A short story here. My neighbor across the street, she's Korean and she immigrated to this country many years ago, but she grew up farming, and farming is always doing something. Every grain of rice has to be picked out of the field. And she said the worst thing that she could be is lazy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a value to her. So lazy. But I don't know that everything that she does is harmful, because harmful to her steadiness, because she likes to raise plants, and she'll take plants and split them apart and make more and more and then start giving them to people, and they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. So it's like a meditation for her, making the plants. It's busy, but it's also a meditation for her. She enjoys it. So it's a lot of words here that we're trying to interpret that mean different things to different people. And I really appreciate your talk, Chris. So thank you very much.
You. Cool. Awesome. All right. Well,
we have just another minute here. We have Robin.
Robin.
Yeah. Just
Chris, thank you so much. I just loved what you had to say. And it's very helpful to me as a career coach, because I really take an opposite view of the pushing to get ahead and really encouraging people to find where their heart is and to slow down, you know, and it's really helpful to me and supportive to hear what you had to say. And I certainly need to apply it to my own life too. So thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Robin.
Anyone else here in the room or online? Last comments, thoughts, questions? Yeah, we have Shuping.
Chris, I just want to say thank you. Like you mentioned, it's really resonate to me that laziness. I grew up in a similar situation as well. I just want to echo what you mentioned about fast means quantity over quality. I used to work in ER. Our goal is pop apart as fast as you can to deal with all the situation, right? And send the patient out of a ER ward, so you can have more space for the patient may coming in. But I would remember that the nurses in like ICU or other wards, they don't always had us like, you guys don't deal with the patient properly. You just want to send them out. So the quality things is really when you can slow down, the quality have a space, have a chance to coming in. Yeah, I just found that beauty. My art, I never did any artwork until I live in a slow paced life now. Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioned that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, those online. Enjoy your Sunday, everyone.